In this episode, we're going to tackle a few small kind of geeky tech questions about artificial intelligence, better known as AI, that may in reality have a pretty big impact on your life, on your genealogy life, if you do family history, and just on your life in general, or the lives of your loved ones, even if you aren't a genealogist like many of us watching today. We're going to talk about questions like, is artificial intelligence the same thing as machine learning? Maybe you've had that question. And if not, how are they related? And am I using AI without even being aware of it? And what impact is AI really having on our lives? Is it all good? Are there some pitfalls that we need to be aware of? We're going to take these on with a focus on family history, but pretty quickly I think you're going to discover that it's a much more far-reaching subject than just in terms of family history. And so that means that this episode is for everyone. I hope if you find it insightful, you will share it with your friends and your family as well. Now, while I've done my own homework on this subject, and of course I've written about artificial intelligence and the impact, particularly on Google search, in my book, The Genealogist Google Toolbox, I'm smart enough to call in an expert when an expert is needed. So my special guest today is Benjamin Lee. He is the developer of the Newspaper Navigator. It's that free tool that we talked about in a past episode, episode 26 of Elevenses with Lisa. And what it does is it helps you find, search for, and retrieve and get access to the images that are in historic newspapers. And Newspaper Navigator is available, of course, as part of Chronicling America at the Library of Congress website. Ben is a 2020 Innovator in Residence at the Library of Congress, as well as a third-year PhD student in the Paul G. Allen School for Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington, where he studies human-AI interaction with his advisor, Professor Daniel Weld. He graduated from Harvard College in 2017 and has served as the inaugural Digital Humanities Associate Fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, as well as a visiting fellow in Harvard's History Department. And currently, he is a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow. So without further ado, let's jump into a conversation about artificial intelligence with Benjamin Lee. Hi, Ben. Nice to see you via Zoom versus just in chat in our last episode. It's so good to see you here.
So nice to see you too. And once again, thank you so much for the, it was such a wonderful surprise for Jamie and me to be able to pop in and see Newspaper Navigator being demoed. And you did such an incredible job with it. And we're so excited that you were able to reach such a wide audience with it as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was sitting there thinking, how did they figure out? I mean, it's hard enough for most of my viewers just to make it there live at the right time. How did you find us?
So we found it, I believe one of the other LC Labs team members found it on Twitter right around when it was launching. And so we quickly got on and saw that the YouTube video recording was live and popped on. So I'm really glad we were able to catch it. And then I was able to rewatch the portion that I had missed at the beginning on the archived version on YouTube, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was, I think one of the best or most enjoyable parts of Newspaper Navigator has been seeing other people use it. And your demo was so in depth and you covered all the bases. And so we were just so glad that you were, able to communicate it so effectively and so well. So we're so appreciative of that.
Oh, well, you had my favorite stuff. You had newspapers, you had photographs, you had the search capability. I mean, it was just everything that catches my eye is sparkling objects out there. And I know that everybody watching was going to be excited to try to use it. So we did our best to try to get in depth into it. And I'd be interested to have you share with everybody, what was the inspiration behind creating that project to begin with?
Yeah, definitely. I can give a little bit of context on the project itself and a bit more about my own trajectory as well, if that would be helpful.
That'd be great.
So Newspaper Navigator really comes out of some questions that I've been thinking about in terms of how we can apply computational techniques like, machine learning being the buzzword to various, archival or library collections and think about really how we can improve information access or really what I might call our ability to search over this content. And so I had been, fortunate enough to have seen a lot of the work with Chronicling America at the library and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and also the crowdsourcing initiative Beyond Words, where volunteers were asked to effectively draw bounding boxes around various visual content in the World War I era pages in Chronicling America. And so that was really the main inspiration for Newspaper Navigator, was thinking through, if we have all of these, volunteers who have produced this incredible data set or collection of this photos and illustrations and whatnot, could we perhaps use that as some sort of training data for a machine learning algorithm to then try to do it overall Chronicling America? And so the project Newspaper Navigator really had two central parts. The first part was running machine learning over all of the pages to extract all the photos and whatnot. And then the second phase resulted in the search app, which you demoed, which really thought about, now that we have all this visual content, how can we really try to navigate this sea or this wealth of information in new ways? And so that's been the sort of the arc of the project. In terms of my own background, I'm continuing to work on Newspaper Navigator in my own dissertation work, and there thinking about the ideas of searching over information, what I might call exploratory search, and how we can really provide those kinds of affordances or new approaches for all sorts of people, whether it's genealogists or historians or educators who are trying to make this kind of rich historical content available to the public. So.
Well, and that's what caught my eye again and fascinated me, was that I've always been very much into data visualization and helping genealogists think, okay, you have these stacks of papers, you've got databases, but have you looked at it in a new visual way, in a visual format? I use mapping a lot for that, but I noticed that data visualization was something that you've spoken on in the past as well. So we have a lot of intersections in our interest in all this. I know that you have background in this. So you were working with LC Labs, the Library of Congress Labs, which was actually new to me. I didn't realize they had kind of a formalized labs going on. I think that was new to many of my viewers. And it said that in your work interning with them, that you'd also worked with the Holocaust Museum. Tell us a little bit about that.
Definitely. Yeah. So my own personal sort of background and I guess entry into thinking about these kinds of questions to begin with is my grandmother is a survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. And so throughout my life, I've had an interest in Holocaust studies or taking coursework related to the Holocaust. And so the year after I graduated college, I was actually a fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum doing digital humanities work. And so a lot of my work there was thinking through, they have a very enormous collection or database called the International Tracing Service Archive, which has about 200 million pages of digitized documents related to victims of the Holocaust. And my own grandmother is actually in the collection itself. And so I had encountered it maybe about a decade ago when I went and visited the museum with my grandmother. So it was almost, in a sense, this very full circle story where I started with my grandmother working and doing genealogical work in the archive, and then eventually ended up on the other side. And so a lot of my own interest in this space really comes from thinking about these kinds of, the exact kinds of questions that your viewers are thinking about in terms of finding information on family, and using, I think, those kinds of questions that I was encountering as an opportunity to then inform my own sort of work or my research as well. And so I would say that, I particularly appreciate the opportunity to speak to other genealogists, because that particular, I think, drive and interest has been a real motivating factor in terms of what, the arc of my own career and everything as well.
And I really do think it's the future of genealogical research. People often ask me, okay, you've been at this for a long time. What's coming? What's in the future? And I say it really is the application of the technology to this information we already have. Because just when we think we've gleaned everything out of it, you realize, if I visualize it this way, or if I search it in this way, then new things come to light. So that's why I just think your work is absolutely fascinating. I'd love to talk to you. You mentioned machine learning, and you mentioned, people hear AI and artificial intelligence. I know some of those kinds of things, and I've talked about it in my book, but you know so much more. To help us separate that out, tease it out a little bit, when we hear machine learning and we hear artificial intelligence, what are these two components and how do they interplay?
Yeah, definitely. So, certainly it's the case that machine learning and artificial intelligence are buzzwords. And so, I think they're pretty oversaturated in terms of the media and whatnot. But generally speaking, the idea behind artificial intelligence is how we can use computers to try to replicate some form of tasks that humans are able to do from a sort of like intellectual or cognitive standpoint. So this takes the form of a number of different things. Some that you think we all might be familiar with are image classification. So for example, feeding a computer an image and figuring out what's in it. So for example, does this image have a dog or a cat in it? Another example would be sort of question answering. So if you're using Siri or your Echo or something like that, and you ask it a question, then the system effectively learns how to process that information and return an answer. The distinction between machine learning and artificial intelligence, I know, is often unclear in terms of how it's framed. Machine learning effectively refers to one kind of approach toward artificial intelligence. So you can really think about artificial intelligence as the larger set containing machine learning and some other types of approaches. It just so happens that a lot of the techniques that people are pushing on these days are sort of within the scope of machine learning. But really, I think for the general public, they can be used pretty interchangeably. And so, in my case, a lot of what we're working on in this space with machine learning is how we can apply it to visual content. So whether it's a document or a newspaper page or a photograph, and effectively try to use these algorithms to try to infer different things about what's present. So in Newspaper Navigator, for example, differentiating, say, portraits of people from photos of buildings. And so trying to use these ideas that have emerged a lot from that sort of technology space and move them back into library or archives and stuff like that.
Well, I know a lot of the content, the Chronicling American Library of Congress, as I understand it, like you said, they drew the boxes so they could say, this is a picture, pay attention to this. But then there's also tagging and metadata and things going on. And I found myself, as I was working with it, thinking, okay, I'm getting this essentially the generalized direction I'm trying to go, but I would love to be able to then add in not only even just keywords or tags, but even, operators that might help further explain to the system what I'm trying to find. What do you see in the future of, because I'm sure that, you had a limited amount of time to work on it. You said you're continuing maybe to work on it. What kinds of things do you see in the future that can be added to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think precisely what you're talking about are things that I'm very interested in. So in addition to letting people effectively just sort of click on images and say what they're interested in, giving people the ability to then specify with, as you said, applying tags or typing in their own keywords. Another angle that I think I'm really excited about and pushing ahead with my own research is thinking about how we can share these different navigators that we've created. In effect, I might have one that I'm interested in, but I'm really interested in the idea of if we can sort of do this as a community and start sharing them, that might really open up doors for how we think about the information. And so really, I think both improving the kinds of ways that we're interacting or, providing feedback to the system, and also how we can do that in a collective manner.
Yeah, I think about visual content is so ripe for this because I teach a lot about using Google Books. And yes, you can keyword search, but I just did this last week. I was saying some of the really amazing things that you find, though, are these one-of-a-kind maps that were drawn just for this book that delineate this situation at a moment in history. And wouldn't it be nice to also be able to grab images as well as just the text? I haven't seen that functionality so much yet in Google Books, but I could see that as a potential.
No, definitely. I would say that, I think I rather naively always thought about newspapers as a very sort of textual material.
Right.
But seeing beyond words really challenged me on that. And I was just so excited by all of the kinds of visual content coming back out. And I definitely agree with you. I think there's so much interesting work to be done surrounding, all sorts of collections in terms of not just thinking about the text there, but thinking about the visual aspect and really both how that, we can extract it and then also sort of compare things and draw broader comparisons, whether it's for the kinds of questions that you're asking on, with your viewers, or the kinds of questions that a historian might ask about the history of printing or something like that too.
Has that got you thinking about, you've had a lot of exposure to different kinds of materials. You certainly have been into the genealogical space. Are there other opportunities? I mean, okay, we're talking about pictures in documents or books, but what other kinds of things have we not yet fully tapped into that are sitting right there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think the world is our oyster, so to speak. I think one of the real treats about having a chance to work with LC Labs and the Library of Congress is just getting a sense of the kinds of collections that the library has. I'm always overwhelmed, just exploring whether it's lock.gov or just more generally sort of poking around at just the really kinds of incredible material that they have. And I think this goes even beyond sort of physical materials that are then digitized, even thinking about the web, which the library is archiving. How can we try to process all of these web pages from the 1990s, for example, which 40 or 50 years down the road will be, I think, a part of our collective past in an entirely different way. So really, I think there's so many opportunities there, and it seems like there's a lot of momentum within this broader community in terms of trying to apply these techniques. So I'm really excited to see what happens over the the coming years in the field.
Now, there certainly are, with all the great stuff that can come out of it, there's always the potential of the pitfalls. And I'm thinking about, everybody, whether they're conscious of it or not, has experienced on Facebook that they're on Facebook, and pretty soon it starts to become this echo chamber of people and ideas, and you start to think, where's everybody else? I'm not getting this in my feed. And I'm sure you touched on some of that as you worked with Newspaper Navigator, discovering that, in a sense, you could be given a false sense of what exists and what does not exist within a collection. I showed an example of this in a recent presentation where I was searching. Politics is the big thing that's, obviously on everybody's mind right now. And I was just doing a simple anti-Trump, anti-Biden, anti-Hillary, anti-Bernie search. And the variations in the impressions that Google gave for each one were really not surprising, eye-opening, and that Bing delivered something very, very different. So what we know is that, in a sense, what you get prompted to find more of, and here's the machine learning trying to find more of what it thinks you want, you also run into the potential of missing whole swaths of information. Give me some of your thoughts on that, because I think this is on people's minds.
Definitely. Yeah, I would say that thinking through the ways in which machine learning is not going to be a cure-all or going to give us, only perfect answers is a really important part of both the field, and I think I've tried to incorporate it into my work as well. Machine learning does, for all the great things it provides, does have a really long history of perpetuating bias and marginalization. Machine learning ultimately, at the end of the day, is dependent on the kinds of training data you're used for the system. And the training data ultimately is labeled by humans. And so the kind of data that you're training on, you never escape the human biases in these systems. And moreover, I think because people tend to trust technology a lot, these things can go unchecked and can be really harmful. So, one aspect of this that creeped in with Newspaper Navigator actually is that these kinds of machine learning models for recognizing visual similarity tend not to perform well if the image quality is lower. And so one example of this is that in the microfilm digitization process for newspaper pages, I'm sure you've noticed this effect as well, but people of darker skin tones tend to be washed out because the color tends to be stretched pretty strongly to either completely white or completely black. And so there are cases where effectively people of darker skin tones, their features are entirely washed out. And so the underlying machine learning algorithm then can't really even recognize that there's a person there or compare them. So I ended up, as part of Newspaper Navigator, writing what I called a data archaeology. You can find it on the search application site, where I try to dive into these questions in more detail. And I think, ultimately at the end of the day, it's really important that both the people who create these systems, but also the people who are using them, are really aware of these kinds of ways in which these systems can go wrong, and also try to think through the ways in which it's, not just that it's creating this problem, but how we can actively try to push back against it or incorporate this knowledge into how we use the tools. So it's a very welcome point that you've made, and I think something that we all really need to keep in mind whenever we see machine learning appearing.
Absolutely. And, that just this last year of being kind of essentially stuck at home, doing our research from home, it's certainly expanded our horizons in terms of what's available online. It's brought more online quicker. But at the same time, and people will say, oh, Lisa, don't you know you can go in person? Well, absolutely, but a lot of people can't for whatever reason, whether it's COVID or just physical situation or proximity to the archive itself. But we do run into challenges when we are working with online data, because again, that is also controlled and can be manipulated. And I was thinking back, I was watching a documentary, and them in communist China, they destroyed people's genealogies. And that's really something on people's minds, is how do I protect when I put my genealogy, my family tree, whatever my research is, into a digital format? I'm backing it up. Okay, that's great. I'm trying to protect it, but in a sense, I am still putting it out there, and it can be manipulated. So, what are some of your thoughts about preservation and what people can do to make sure that they can preserve their own history?
Yeah, I would say, I am oftentimes, I fall victim to this as well, where I will think is if I digitize something, it means it's safe. And, I a lot with my grandmother's documents and everything, but
right.
It's oftentimes, the case where you mislabel a file, you don't have a backup or whatever, and it's just as easy for something as digitized to disappear, or maybe even easier, if you have a computer and it updates and all of a sudden some file types no longer work. So I think being very disciplined about keeping regular backups of your files. Also, I think also keeping physical copies of things when you can is really important. In terms of the sharing component of it as well, I think what you're saying is definitely an important point as well, which is that oftentimes when we upload our files to these proprietary systems, they're not at the, they're existing somewhere in the cloud, they're on someone else's servers. And so we don't necessarily have as much control over our data as we might like. And I think one example of this where we should all be a bit more vigilant is that if we upload something into the cloud on, say, not to pick on any specific company, but into the Google Drive or something like that, there is no real guarantee that 20 years from now, everything in Google Drive will be there. And so also I think having local copies is really important as well.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. One of the things I keep kind of pounding away at is if you want to put your online family tree on Ancestry or MyHeritage, awesome. You got to have your own database. You got to have that backed up. And even then, I periodically do print out a report, just so it's all printed in paper. I put that in a fire safe. Because gosh, things have, media and file types have changed so much just in our lifetime. It's unbelievable. Going back to AI, where are you seeing this touching our life, whether it's on websites or the search engines we're using or the databases for historical collections? Give us a little more of your thoughts about where you see the future of all this going.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will continue to be an ever-present part of our lives in various facets. We see it appearing in new places every day. I think one place where, for better or for worse, it's appearing is sort of the idea of the Internet of Things. So that example might be, instead of just your phone, you might have your Fitbit or your smartwatch or all of these things, which are also giving you a lot of feedback on your life. But the trade-off, of course, is that there's also data being collected. And so I think we'll start to see these kinds of, AI or machine learning being deployed on these kinds of devices and these kinds of systems to try to, gather or process different kinds of data that we might not currently be getting just with the cell phone. In terms of, other concrete examples, I would say, I think it already is, present from when we need directions on our phone to when we're, with healthcare applications. And so I think it will just increasingly become a part of sort of the fabric of our lives. And, I don't know if I have necessarily one concrete place where I would say it would show up, or where I, think it will really show up more and more. But it is definitely the case that there's, a lot of interest and a lot of really, cool research going on in this space. And so I think the kinds of questions that we've been discussing here on the show are the important ones, trying to weigh the trade-off between the really kinds of, immense benefits that we get in our lives with the real kinds of downsides, if it's through bias or if it's through, data protection, and how we can all be sort of vigilant about those kinds of trade-offs.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one last question on AI. I know that many people are wondering, is that interacting? Am I interacting with that? I'd love to, because I know this is by far, you're the expert on this. What kinds of motions in our day, what things do we do during the day that, in a sense, is data that can be then collected and then used for the machine learning and the use of artificial intelligence and other things? Obviously, when we're on the web, we're clicking things and we're looking at things and we're pausing at things. What kinds of things do we do on a regular basis that contribute to the data?
Yes. So definitely whenever we're online and we're clicking things or going to new tabs or typing in search queries, that typically is being recorded. And then, if you do a Google search or if you start browsing on Amazon and you get new products recommended to you, those are all machine learning algorithms on the back end doing it. But really, whenever we're carrying our smartphone with us, there's data there in terms of different applications might have preferences set to be able to access your location. Then in these kinds of smart appliances that you might see. So, for example, smart TV, those two are also communicating data on what kinds of things you're watching. If they're plugged into the internet, typically there is some sort of data collection being done. But really, surprising amount of data is being collected on us on a daily basis, and so it's just something for us to, I think, to be aware of and understand that it is being collected. Even though when I'm certainly clicking around on the internet, it doesn't always strike me that that's necessarily being recorded or whatnot. But somewhere out there, it probably is by the various companies or tracking services or cookies or whatnot as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you said you were continuing to work on Newspaper Navigator. And so might we be seeing, because this was one of the big questions I got after the show that I did was, are they going to add features? We touched on some of the types of things that you might be able to do. How much time do you have in your busy day? I know you're going for your PhD and you're involved in a lot of projects. What kinds of things and how soon might we see additions to Newspaper Navigator?
Yeah, great question. So with Newspaper Navigator moving forward, I will definitely be incorporating new features, and this will be deployed primarily actually through the University of Washington now, which is where I'm doing my PhD. The version that you're seeing on the Library of Congress site on labs.loc.gov will be maintained for about 2 years in that current state. But in terms of my own research, we'll definitely be incorporating new functionality. And when I do so, I can definitely reach out to you and let you know when we have new features, if you'd be interested.
Yeah.
I'd say that those are probably on the time scale of, months, not years or anything like that from when I'll be rolling them out. Definitely, I will be iterating on different kinds of new features and functions in terms and seeing, how people are interacting with them. But certainly, feedback on the application is always welcome. I know, from very specific things like related to being able to apply and or operators and the keyword search functionality to sort of pie in the sky type ideas about how you want to look for visual content. All of that is very useful for me. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I do want my work to be very user centric in the sense that I really do believe that the ultimate goal of these tools are to provide features that make it more useful to the viewers or to whoever is using the tool. So really trying to serve them first. And so that kind of feedback is very valuable.
Awesome. Well, and I'd love to see you be able to sell it to Google Books. I'd love to see it in those kinds of collections. It's just amazing how much is out there.
And one thing I will add, interject here, is that all of the code for the project and data set itself is all in the public domain. So it belongs to the American people. And so on the site, if you click around, you'll be able to get to the code. But the goal of that really was to try to make it as open, as accessible as possible. And so we're really hoping that other cultural heritage institutions or other groups leverage the code or try to build on it to produce their own versions of the search application. So it really is definitely not only something that is available, but we're actively really trying to hope to see engagement with the code and sort of track longitudinal use in terms of hopefully seeing other tools like Newspaper Navigator or spring up from the code that we've made available.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Now, Library of Congress has the labs. Are you going to be involved in any other future different kinds of projects there, or was that kind of a one-time event?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, I love working with the labs team. They're all incredible, and I would highly recommend everyone to check out some of their other projects that they've been working on. While I was there, the other innovator in residence, his name was Brian Fu, did an incredible project where he effectively sort of grabbed audio clips throughout all the our various audiovisual collections of the library
Yeah.
and made a hip hop sampler, so you can put drum beats over short clips, and it's a really really cool way of searching the audio content at the library. But I think it's just one of examples of many different projects that people are pursuing with labs to really push the envelope on how we access materials and think about searching them. I would certainly love opportunities moving forward to continue working with labs, and luckily, I with Newspaper Navigator have an excuse to be in contact with them well into the future. But would definitely recommend everyone to take a look at their website, which is labs.loc.gov, and poke around at some of the really cool projects that they have going on.
Yeah. I did a the future of technology and genealogy presentation a week or so ago. And one of the things I was talking about was that now we can search for words in podcasts, which is huge. It's not just the title and the description, but we can actually search and see that, this episode has somebody talking about something we're interested in. Would love to see this kind of search coming into audio and video. So it doesn't rely just on the text associated with it, but it's actually digging into the audio itself. That'd be amazing.
Definitely.
Well, anything else that you are up to that we should look for, or would you like to share your website and have us visit you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that'd be great. You can find my website. It is bcglee.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I believe my handle is lee_BCG. I'm pretty active there, but definitely, anyone feel free to reach out by email or over Twitter. It's always a real privilege to be able to talk to people who are using Newspaper Navigator, who are just curious. But anyway, I'm just so appreciative of the response that from you and your viewers with Newspaper Navigator, and so glad that it's helped people find photos that they've been interested in and whatnot. And so definitely looking forward to hearing from people moving forward.
We want to thank you for the kind of work that you're doing with this, because it's exciting to see, and we love when there's new opportunities in places that are tried and true that we've already visited once, like Chronicling America. And then to see all new opportunities there is really cool. Ben, thank you so much. Such a pleasure talking with you. You're from my neck of the woods. I lived in Tacoma for many, many years. So you're a little further north, but
moved out to Seattle a couple of years ago now, and I've loved it. I'm actually currently on the East Coast right now, just staying with my parents due to COVID, but I love it out in Seattle, and I'm really glad that I had a chance to explore the Pacific Northwest.
It's lovely. Bring an umbrella, right? All right. Thanks so much, Ben. Great talking to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Ben for a really interesting conversation, and for Newspaper Navigator. Gosh, if you haven't checked it out yet, you got to do it. Go watch episode 26. You'll get the full rundown on it, and it's a wonderful tool. I am really looking forward to hearing from him about his updates and his improvements that sound like they're going to be coming not too much in the distant future. Covering technology and its application to genealogy is always a bit of a double-edged sword, and it can be really awesome, but also a little problematic in its invasiveness. I know some of you guys were talking about that in the live chat. Ben said a surprising amount of data is being collected on us, which is probably even an understatement. And another question to have, and that we can talk about now, is how our data, and specifically our genealogy data, is being used. With all this collection, what's being done with it and who's using it? I mean, tools like website hints, like the Ancestry and MyHeritage and the Find My Past hints that we get, those are great. The Newspaper Navigator, Google Lens, they all have a lot to offer, and they're all using in some form artificial intelligence. But on a personal level, I'm actually a bit of a skeptical person, and I don't tend to take things at face value. I'm actually really concerned about the long-reaching effects of artificial intelligence on the future, and most importantly, on our descendants, my descendants and my grandkids. AI can seriously impact our privacy, our security, and even our freedom. And we're currently experiencing kind of a cancel culture today that I think everybody is kind of deeply concerned about. I would never have imagined in my lifetime that we would see some of the censorship that we're seeing today. What this really tells us is that big tech, in particular, has a lot of power. And they, among others, are using our data and want to use our data. So I think this is definitely a conversation worth having. I did a lot of research for this episode, and I discovered a few things I wanted to kind of share with you. Artificial intelligence is really, from everything that I'm seeing, having the same kind of massive and disrupting impact that DNA has had on our genealogy, but with almost none of the publicity. It's really interesting. You know, what we found was we were doing DNA testing as genealogists, kind of on the forefront of that, and looking at all our matches. And then we come to discover that, you know, we put them into a public database that we think only genealogists are using, something like GEDmatch. Come to find out that criminal investigators figured out, wow, there's some value there in that data. And that's not surprising, but it wasn't necessarily on most of the forefront of our minds. Well, there's been a lot of debate about that. And, the fact that DNA results really are a valuable commodity for lots of different purposes, not even just criminal investigations. So there's been a lot of hoopla about that. But that got me wondering too, who else might be interested in other kinds of data that we generate? Because like it or not, genealogy is a fairly personal thing to be doing, right? So what kind of data do we have? Well, in addition to our DNA results, we have family tree data. We actually have the data that's generated and all the activity from all of our genealogy research. Well, who might else be interested in that? Well, academic researchers. They have a very keen interest in it. And I can only assume that our data also has value in the marketplace as well. So I want to give you one example. It's the record linking lab at Brigham Young University. Now, this came up a lot in the research that I was doing. So this record linking lab, of course, at a university, it's run by a BYU economics professor. And they published a research paper. It was co-authored with not a BYU professor, it was an economics and women's studies professor out of Notre Dame. So in them looking at record linking and genealogy data, it was not about genealogy at all. It was about economics and social issues and maybe even political issues. Who knows? So I wanted to read to you some of the highlights from this published paper that kind of came up in my research, because I think it gives us a pretty eye-opening and close-up look at the value that those outside the genealogy community are placing on all of this massive genealogy data that we're collecting as genealogists and creating about our ancestors. And of course, just like with DNA, when we find information, when we collect it, when we put it out there, we're actually putting out information about ourselves as well, because we're related to them. So, and we're doing this publicly. We're putting out there, publicly available. We don't tend to think of people who are not genealogists as looking at that data or being interested in it, but they are. So keep in mind as I read some of the excerpts from this paper, which I don't normally read to you, but I think this is worth doing, this kind of the story behind this is that, and if you think about it this way, historical records, birth records, death records, military information, the census, they've always been available to, let's talk about the academic realm, because that's where this published paper comes from. They've always been available to academic researchers, but really on an individual basis. Each record was kind of standalone. And they really couldn't follow those records for individual people and families and draw, and really generations of families to see trends, right? They really couldn't look at these records and see these trends through generations of time and draw conclusions from them. They were really stuck with individual one-by-one records, the 1920 census and a family in that census. But for the first time, artificial intelligence is making it possible to link these records for real living people and past living people and their families. Because again, we're all connected for social science and economic uses. So let me just read to you a couple of highlights because I think this is really interesting. It definitely gives us a peek into perhaps ways in which people are interested in using the data that you and I are generating. So the paper is called Combining Family History and Machine Learning to Link Historical Records. And they start out by saying that the ability to confidently link individuals across U.S. Census records opens up opportunities for important social science research. For many of the most pressing questions in the social sciences, empirical analysis relies on access to data that allow the researcher to observe people at different points in their life or across generations. In this paper, we propose a new approach that can be used in conjunction with other methods to link individuals across census records. So they started with census records. We focus specifically on a novel way to create large training sets for machine learning that can be used with supervised machine learning algorithms. So they say our approach makes use of linkages created by individuals conducting family history research. That's me and you. The key feature we exploit is that when the profile for a deceased individual on one of these websites has multiple sources attached to it, each pair of these sources can potentially be used to train the data to make new matches. Now, keep in mind, they're not talking about hinting matches. They're talking about matches to create this greater, larger, interconnected database that can then also be used to further accelerate machine learning. The genealogy platform we use for this study is Family Search. We use a sample of individuals from this family tree that are attached to at least 2 census records between 1900 and 1920. So this is interesting. It's talking about, when we use these different sites, whether they're free or subscription, we read the terms of service, or we try to. It's kind of a lot of reading. But I haven't heard about any of this kind of stuff in terms of coming from these sites. We don't often hear in what other ways our data, as we add it to the site, might be used. So they talk about this in this paper. Family Search provided us a file with a personal identification number. It's called a PID for the individual profile on the family tree and for the census record that allows us to observe these matches. This process produces a large, detailed, and highly representative training set. Training data, which is training the machine learning, plays a key role in supervised machine learning algorithms, and lack of training data has been one of the main barriers to using these methods to link historical records. This is the problem they've had in the past. A key contribution of our paper is the insight that the decisions that are made in the process of doing family history research that you and I are doing on various genealogical websites can provide an additional source of training data. This can provide a relatively low-cost way to create very large training sets. The family tree is a public wiki-style resource. And as you know, the family search tree is one big global tree. We don't each have our own individual tree. So it's possible for outside researchers to use the Family Search API to obtain similar training data directly from the family tree. There are also other websites that have public trees for which data could potentially be gathered using automated approaches, automating pulling that data off the trees. The public member trees on Ancestry.com could also provide a larger training set. One way to achieve a high level of accuracy in the training data would be to focus just on those public member trees created by professional genealogists. And we're currently working with Ancestry.com to provide a training set that could be shared with academics through the same system process at the University of Minnesota that provides access to the census data files. So they may be working with these different companies and sharing even further. We'll be working with Family Search to create a specific email campaign in which we share predicted links that have been identified with experienced users and alert them to the fact that they should be extra careful about these record hints because they might not be correct. The precision threshold that Family Search uses normally for record hints is 95%. Once the email campaign is sent out, we'll be able to observe the decisions that these users made, me and you, with regards to our record hints in terms of whether they decide to attach the record or indicate that it was not a match. So that got me wondering, do we ever get emails that prompt us for different activities and we don't realize necessarily that there's another organization involved, or that they will be, as they said here, observing or monitoring the activity that we do after we interact with it? It's a good question. So when it gets back down to their conclusion area, they said there's a huge research potential from being able to link large samples of individuals across historical records. Clearly there is. Our paper provides a unique contribution by focusing on a source of training data that was largely untapped by the academic research community. What we propose in this paper is that these pairs of records attached to the same person be used as training data and combined with supervised machine learning algorithms to link individuals across historical records. One advantage of the source of training data that we use is that the same process could be applied to any two types of records that are available on various genealogical platforms. Military information, birth and death information, that kind of thing. So I hope you appreciate in this, when they talk about, what this creates, it's something that's really never existed before. Who knew that our genealogy research each day would have this kind of impact? And it's a lot to think about. In fact, I kind of came up with a few ideas here that I wanted to share with you about this. So we can see that there's a real application for them in using the information and feeding it into machine learning. And for them, it's about the research, the economics, the social issues. It's not genealogically driven. And as you heard, genealogy companies are working with them and probably other groups as well. This is just one example of one published paper that I found on the web. Working with the various genealogy website companies and sharing the information that we provide with these other interested parties in a couple of different ways. Now, if you might recall, in using Family Search several years ago, you didn't have to have a Family Search account, right? You could just go and use the free website, and now you do. So they've kind of gotten over one hurdle, which is we now have a unique identifier as a researcher. We've uniquely identified ourselves with every interaction that we do with each website. Now, one of the problems that these researchers had in the past when they talked about the census was that the census did not indicate Social Security number. So while you found individuals, you could never be totally sure. You didn't have a unique identifier for each person. So now, as a researcher, we have one with the websites, and Family Search now, as they said in the paper, assigns a personal identification number, or PDI, to each person in the global family tree. So this supports the use of our information outside of genealogy research for sure. This solves a lot of problems for them, and it makes this data even much more shareable and much more valuable. There's definitely reasons within genealogy that PID would be interesting too, because you're trying to say, we're trying to identify this one person. But it's interesting to think about that, like all other technology, sometimes we see a tool come along or we see a functionality come along and we think it's for our benefit, but who knows? It could be for a variety of different reasons and benefits. The Record Linking Lab is just one partner with Family Search, and now they're working with Ancestry or talking about working with them. But I think this just gives you a little glimpse into this world of artificial intelligence, how it can accelerate the use of our data, how it can actually turn it into new pieces of information that were never available in the past, and that there's a lot of interest in it. So it's a lot to think about. I think it's really important that we're aware of and understand how our data is being used well outside of our own genealogy sandbox. I know it was news to me as I did this, and I don't have time to cover everything that I came across, but it's easy to research yourself, and I encourage you to do your own homework, learn more about it, learn more about that, and that will help you continue to make educated decisions about what you do with your data, what goes public and what doesn't. And you can always change your mind as well. So we don't have to continue. We can pull data down. We can move it. We can do whatever we want to do. We're in the driver's seat. And that's my message to you. I want us all to be aware and eyes open and getting the most out of our family history research for our own families. I hope that you have found today's discussion thought-provoking. It's been thought-provoking for me. It's certainly been an interesting week of research. I love the conversation with Ben. Check out the show notes for this. We have a webpage of show notes just for this particular episode, which is number 32. You can find it at genealogygems.com/Elevenses. Get lots more information. I'll have the name of this paper so that you can go out and find it yourself and read it in the complete paper. My plan is also, I'd like to put together a quick survey. I want to get your ideas about AI and your genealogy data and how you feel about these things and what you'd like to see and what your concerns are. So look for that survey on the webpage and take that. I'll be sharing the results here in an upcoming episode. My thanks to Ben for sharing his thoughts and expertise. And this hour has just flown by. I'm going to be checking out the chat and answering any questions that you have there as best I can in the show notes for this episode. So again, you'll find those on the website in about a day or so from this live event. And I do want to hear your thoughts. So if you have a question or a comment, genealogygemspodcast@gmail.com. I've only been using it for 14 years. I should know it by now. You can also call and leave a voicemail on the voicemail line 925-272-4021. And most importantly, leave a comment here or a question here, and we'll take a look at it. Whether you're watching live today, as soon as this video is over, there'll be a comment section below the video here on YouTube or a comment section on the show notes page. So with that, hey, get out there, have a wonderful week. Tell your friends about the show. Give some thought to the role that AI is playing in your genealogy life. And my friend, find some wonderful genealogy gems this week, okay? Thanks so much for joining me. I'll talk to you soon.